Hey guys, welcome back to the Huggy Poker Vlog. I'm really excited about this episode, but before we jump into the action, I've got two things to share. First, I've got these brand new custom Huggy card protectors that are available in the new merch shop. Click the link in the corner or down below in the description of the video. Second, on my last episode, when I was putting together the intro, I was looking for some shots of the outside of the Bellagio. I had some custom footage from the inside and walking in, but I didn't have any clips of the outside of the Bellagio. And in my search, I ended up using a couple clips from this guy's vlog, Mariano. He's an amazing poker vlogger, amazing poker player. I don't know what he's better at. He's really good at both. But I ended up using a clip from his footage from his vlog. And, you know, it didn't really strike me at the time of using it. It was just kind of like a naive thing that I did, not meaning any harm. But after the fact, realizing that that is Mariano's art form. You know, he puts a lot of effort into his vlog, and the footage that he captures for his B-roll footage specifically. So I want to give an apology to this guy, Mariano. I'm sorry, I'll do better, and I'm definitely not going to do that again. All right, with that all out of the way, let's jump into the action. After taking a shot at 510 yesterday, which you hopefully saw in my last vlog, I decided I wanted to go back and give it another go, playing a full-length session compared to the short one that I had yesterday. I don't want to spoil it, but I make a couple plays that are quite bluntly bad and make me look like a maniac. But we're going to take advantage of that image to come out ahead. Two hands in, we're dealt 5-4 suited in spades in the small blind. The hijack raises to 30, the cutoff calls, and we've got a playable hand, so I call as well. The big blind joins along, and we've got 4 players to the flop. It comes down 6-4-3 rainbow, giving us second pair with an open-ended straight draw. It checks around to the pre-flop raiser, who c-bets for 70. I think calling or raising here are both viable options, and I go with a call. Both other players fold, so we're heads up now. The turn brings the 9 of clubs, which does not improve our hand. I check the pre-flop raiser, who bets again, making it $200. Even if he's got an overpair, our call on the flop should be a bit scary, and I think if we put in a raise here, we're repping a straight, a set, or a 2 pair most of the time, and it's going to be hard for him to continue. And even if he does, we've got a lot of equity. I go for the check raise, making it $560. We're only leaving ourselves another $340 behind, so it's clear we're committed at this point. Our opponent's risking the full amount if he wants to continue, and by not pushing all in, it hopefully makes it look more like we want to call as opposed to trying to push him out of the pot, which we normally might do with a draw. After about 20 seconds, he pushes his cards in and we get shipped a pretty big pot right off the bat. 15 minutes later, we've got King Jack suited in the hijack. The player on our right limps in and I raise to 50. The cutoff calls and the limper calls as well, so we've got 3 players to the flop. The flop is Jack 4 King with 2 diamonds, so we flop top 2. There are some flush and straight draws out there, so I don't really want to slow play here. When the limper checks to us, I put out a c-bet for 100. Both players fold and we take it down. A half hour later, we've got King 5 suited in the cutoff. The +1 player limps in and I raise to 50 in position. The big blind and limper both call and we've got 3 to the flop. It's an interesting one as it comes down 3 deuce 4 with 2 clubs, giving us an open-ended straight draw. Both players check to us and I c-bet for 100. My bet sizing here is on par with how I've been betting so far in the game, but I think a bet sizing closer to half pot, maybe $80, would probably have been better here in the long term. We'd still be putting on the aggression while not risking as much when we get called. Just the limper ends up calling, so we're heads up now. The turn brings the 7 of hearts, which shouldn't change anything. Our opponent checks to us again, and I think he could easily call on the flop with a draw or weak pair that would fold to a turn bet. With that, I make it $220. Unfortunately for us, our opponent rips it in for $925 total, and we're left in a bad spot. I just can't imagine we're ahead here most of the time, and in the end, I let this one go. 2 hands later, we're in the +2 position, and I look down at King-Queen offsuit. I raise it up to $30, or at least I try, but unfortunately, I didn't realize that the end of the gun player straddled to 20, so this ends up counting as a min raise to 40. The big blind calls, and the straddle, who's been quite an aggressive player at the game so far, 3-bets to 200. Given his aggression so far at the game, I definitely feel like he could be taking advantage of the misbet, and considering we've got position, I end up joining along. The big blind calls as well, so the 3 of us head to the flop together, and it comes down 3-10-4 with 2 hearts. We pick up a whole lot of nothing. Both players check to us, and this doesn't feel like a great spot to try to steal given the action, so I check back hoping to improve. The turn is the 6 of hearts putting 3 to a flush out there. Unfortunately, we don't have a heart in our hand, so we don't even pick up a draw. We get checked to a second time, and I briefly consider taking a stab at the pot, but given how little equity we've got, along with the fact that the passive action might encourage any weak pair or draw that's ahead of us to call, I think better of it and check back again. The river ends up giving us top pair when it brings the king of hearts. Unfortunately, it also puts a 4-liner to a flush on the board, which we do not have. It checks around one last time, and I announce that we've got a king. The straddler mucks, and the big blind rolls over pocket deuces with the deuce of hearts for the smallest possible flush to take it down. 6 hands later, there's a $20 straddle, and the player behind us posts a $10 misblind. The player on our right folds, and we look down at the best starting hand in poker, pocket aces. I raise to 70. The next 2 players to act fold, and it's music to our ears when the cutoff 3-bets to 200. Action folds back to us, and given that we're a bit short stacked from the last couple hands, we really have no other move than to go all in. All in. All in and a call. Our opponent asked if we want to run it twice, which I've been asked a few times in Vegas, but I've just been running everything once since I landed, regardless of whether I've been ahead or behind. We don't get to see our opponent's hand, but the ace on the river makes it a pretty moot point as we've got the virtual nuts. We get a nice double up, and things are moving the right direction again. The very next hand, someone buys the button, and we're in the +2 position again. We look down at ace-queen offsuit. The under the gun player raises to 30, and it folds to us. We've got a premium, and so I put out a 3-bet for 110. It folds back to the original raiser who makes the call, and the flop comes down queen 6 king with 2 clubs. Our opponent checks to us, and although we get a pretty good flop, we've just got second pair. I don't want to bloat the pot here, and there's no reason to bluff, so I check back. The turn's pretty much a brick with the 5 of spades. We get checked to a second time, and now I think it's safe to bet. I go for half pot, making it $120. We get a pretty quick fold, and we take it down. Not even a full orbit later, we look down at ace-king offsuit in the cutoff. We're short-handed, and the same opponent from the last hand straddles to 20. Action folds to us, and I raise to 60. The small blind, the same player we got all in against with aces, 3-bets to 200. It folds back to us, and we're not going anywhere. I 4-bet again, making it 570.
I call. Just once always. Yeah, one time. No. No, I'm not that lucky. I do have an ace now, though. Yeah.
We've got our opponent covered and scoop an almost $2,700 pot. We're up over $1,700 in just a little over an hour of playtime.
Thanks.
We're mostly folding for the next 30 minutes, though we do take a couple flops that lead nowhere until we pick up ace-3 suited in the hijack. The +1 player raises to 30, and the next player on our right calls. I think we've got a good hand for making a squeeze play, and I raise it up to 140. It folds back to the original raiser who calls, and the player in between folds, so we're heads up. The flop is not a great one for our hand as it comes down 8-9-7 rainbow. It's definitely better for our opponent's range, but I've also been showing down legitimate hands for the last hour or so. With that in mind, I go ahead and c-bet for 210. After a lot of thinking, he eventually puts in a check raise, making it 1,040. This is a massive raise, and against anyone else at the table, I'd be folding right away. This is the aggressive player I mentioned earlier though, and it's hard to express through the vlog, but this guy's been 3-betting incredibly liberally pre-flop to a degree that it's really unlikely for him to always have something, and has been continuing that aggression post-flop whenever called. I end up getting in my head about how he could easily be doing this with a bunch of hands that have draws like King 10, Queen 10, Queen Jack, basically paint with some kind of straight draw that's trying to put on the pressure versus a perceived overpair on a scary board. I kind of end up disregarding the nagging feeling that this guy's committed to the pot since he's put in about 2/3 of his stack with only about $500 behind, and finally I convince myself to come over the top instead of cutting our losses. We get called, which we obviously don't want to see.
you probably hit that. I just got an ace. I didn't think you were strong. All right.
He shows pocket sevens for bottom set on the flop. I've thought a lot about this hand since the night it took place, and this is probably the worst play I've made at the poker table in my lifetime. There's a huge part of me that's embarrassed about this play, and I didn't want to include it or make an episode about it. And I'm sure there is a bunch of viewers that will hit the dislike button on the video or leave a negative comment, which are quite honestly the worst parts of vlogging as someone who spends a lot of time and effort putting these together. Despite that though, I wouldn't be honest with myself if I didn't include it. Even though I started this vlog as a fun hobby, another big aspect of why I do it is because there's a lot of learning opportunities that I've had along the way from doing so. I think the biggest takeaway from this hand is that even if my opponent was bluffing here, sometimes we're going to get bluffed and that's okay. Poker's about risk and reward, and even though the reward would have been great here, the risk was incredibly significant. Our opponent may have been overly aggressive in previous spots, but he'd seen that we were showing legitimate hands and he'd committed a huge portion of his stack in this one. He rightfully wasn't afraid of an overpair, and I put aside too many facts focusing only on aspects of this player that were relevant in earlier hands. All we can do now is regroup. After that last hand, we win a few hands, mostly without seeing a flop, and one where we hit top pair on the flop. We're getting a lot of 3-bets behind our raises following that ace high we've shown down, but our opponents are managing to find the fold when I come over the top risking our whole stack. We've managed to build our stack back up to $1,300 over the course of 40 minutes when this next hand comes up. We straddle under the gun for 20. The +1 player raises to 60, and this hand plays like we're in Texas as the cutoff, small blind, and big blind all make the call. We've got a terrible holding as we look down at 10-5 offsuit, and normally I would just toss this into the muck without giving it much thought. But it's only costing us $40 to win 260, giving us about 7-1 pot odds. I figure with such good odds, it might be worth calling with just about any 2 here to see if we can flop a monster and get out if we don't. And the flop comes down 5-8-10 with 2 hearts, giving us top and bottom pair. I'm planning to get the money in here with our unexpected 2 pair with the idea that we're probably only behind 10-8, a set of 8s, or up against a draw. We all check to the pre-flop raiser who c-bets for pot, $300. The cutoff calls and it folds back to us. This pot's blown up pretty big and I'd be happy to take it down here with a shove.
All in.
The pre-flop raiser folds immediately and the cutoff puts in the chips to call.
Oh, that 8 killed me, I think. Oh, you're ahead. You're the set. 2 pair. Go ahead.
Although my pre-flop call is questionable, I don't really have any issues with my play beyond that. Once we flop 2 pair, I don't think there's any way we can get away from it given how the action played out. In any case, we just got felted and we're rebuying for another 1,000. We're in for 2K now. The second hand after rebuying, we look down at pocket deuces in the small blind. The under the gun player raises to 40 and the button calls. We join along to go set mining and the big blind folds. I check dark and the 3 of us head to the flop. It comes down 9 deuce 5 rainbow, so we flop bottom set. The pre-flop raiser c-bets for about half pot, $70, and the player on our right calls. We're definitely not slow playing here, even if the only draw is a flush draw, as I'm definitely expecting to get action with our maniacal image at this point. The dealer forgets we're in the hand though and pulls in the chips, and I've got to remind him there's still action.
Hang on, I'm still here.
Thankfully we catch him in time, and I go for a pretty big raise to $300. Just the pre-flop raiser makes the call, so we're heads up now. And we get a pretty clean turn in the form of the 8 of hearts. We're not slowing down here as I push all in for our last $615. After almost a minute of thinking, you can hear my opponent chatting us about what kind of wild hand we could have here. I guess our image is about to pay off though as he throws in the chip to call.
Set.
Our hand is good, and just like that, we're almost back to even on the day. We pick up a few small pots over the next couple orbits in pretty unnoteworthy hands, but altogether end up adding a few $100 to our stack. We eventually pick up ace-king offsuit in the hijack. It folds to us, and I raise to 30. Just the cutoff calls, so we're heads up. The flop comes down 9 deuce king rainbow, giving us top pair, top kicker. Our opponent checks to us, and I c-bet for 50. He thinks for a bit, and eventually calls. The turn brings the jack of clubs, so the board's getting a little scarier. King jack and queen 10 get there, but we should be ahead of most anything else. I expect if we slow down here though, our opponent will take the lead, and so I decide to go with a check. He ends up doing just that, putting out a bet of $130. We're obviously calling here, and the river brings the 8 of clubs. At first glance, this seems like a scary card, but it really shouldn't change anything. Hands that were ahead of us are still ahead, hands that were behind are still behind. I check again, hoping our opponent will fire one last time, but he smartly checks back. When he checks, I know our hand is good, and we take it down. 15 minutes later, we've got ace-10 suited on the button. Everyone folds to us, and I make it 30. Both blinds call, and the three of us head to the flop. It comes down 8-deuce-5 rainbow. So we miss completely, but we do have 2 overs and a backdoor flush draw. When both players check, I opt to check back and take the free card. The turn's a good one as it brings the 10 of hearts, giving us top pair. The small blind leads for 60, and the big blind calls. And here's where I think I make a mistake by just calling. I really think we should be raising here pretty much always with top, as we want to charge the flush and straight draws, plus our Maniac image means we're probably going to get paid with worse pairs as well. Thankfully, we get a pretty safe river in the form of the 3 of clubs. Both players check, and I put out a bet of $110. Just the big blind calls, and unsurprisingly, our hand is good. 5 hands later, we look down at Pocket Kings first to act. I raise to $30, and it folds all the way around to the small blind who calls, and the big blind calls as well. The 3 of us see a flop, which comes down Jack-Jack-3 with 2 clubs. Both players check to us, and I think we could check or bet here. I opt to take the more passive approach and check back, since we're either way ahead or way behind here. The turn brings a safe-looking 5 of clubs. The small blind, the aggressive player from earlier, leads for 60. The big blind gets out of the way, and I just call here to allow him to keep betting his bluffs on the river. We see the 10 of hearts, which shouldn't change anything, and he leads into us for $160. Knowing this player is aggressive, I think we could raise here for value and probably fold if he comes back over the top. However, I also don't want to run into an aggressive bluff and have to give up our hand, so I end up just making the call instead. I make a mistake here of asking if he's got a jack, and when he says no, I show my hand to take the pot. I think it would have been better to let him show first so we can have more insight into what he's being so aggressive with instead. Either way, I'm happy to take the pot down. A few hands later, we look down at King-Jack offsuit and the hijack. The player on our right limps in, and he's been limping a wide range, sometimes with premiums, so I'm a little bit wary of his limp. Still, I go with a raise here to at least get some idea of where we stand, making it $40. It folds back to the limper who calls, and we're heads up to the flop. It comes down Deuce-Jack-7 with 2 diamonds, so we pick up top pair. Our opponent leads into us, though, for a pretty big bet of $80. Knowing that this guy could easily have limped with a hand like ace-jack or better, I just go with a call. The turn pairs the board with the 7 of hearts. He leads into us again for $100 this time. I think we've got 3 options here. Give him credit and fold, call down here and on the river, or make a small raise now in hopes of taking control of the hand in order to check back on the river. I end up going with the second option of just calling here with the intention of calling on the river for the right price. The river brings the 9 of spades, which shouldn't change anything, and our opponent repeats his bet for $100 again. This smells like value, and you can hear my doubt about our hand at the table.
You're saying you can beat a jack, huh?
With that said, we've really underrepresented our hand up to this point, and although we might be beat, I think there's still some hands like Queen-Jack or Jack-10 that he could be overplaying, so I put in the chip to call.
Alright. That's what I thought you might have. Nice hand. Good hand.
10 minutes later, we've got Jack-8 suited in the +1 position. I make a loose raise here, opening for 30. The player behind us 3-bets to 90. Everyone else folds, and I end up making a loose call here since we've both got pretty deep stacks in front of us. The flop comes down 9-deuce-queen with 2 spades. I check to our opponent who c-bets for 60. We've got a gut shot, and I'd expect him to c-bet 100% of his range here regardless, so I make the call. The turn is the king of spades. I check again, and we get an almost instantaneous check back. The river brings the 4 of spades, putting 4 to a flush on the board. I think if he had a spade in his hand, he probably would have bet on the turn. Our only chance to win here is to bet, so I put out a bet for $200. He just about mucks before we can even get the chips out, and we take down another one. Almost 40 minutes pass before the next interesting hand. We straddle for 20, and action folds to the button who makes it 60. Both blinds fold, and we look down at a premium, ace-king offsuit. I 3-bet on the bigger side since we're out of position, making it $240. The button thinks for about 30 seconds and eventually puts in the chips to call, so we're off to a flop out of position. And we miss completely when it comes down 9-7 queen with 2 diamonds. Still, given our 3-bet preflop, I think we've got to continue the aggression here, and I put out a bet of $210. Our opponent acts a lot faster this time, putting in the chips to call. The turn gives us a little hope as we see the Jack of Hearts giving us a gut shot to Broadway. Still, I expect we're behind given the action, and I check it over to our opponent. He puts out a not-so-small bet of $600. We're not beating anything here other than a bluff, and given the action, we probably need to hit a 10 and exactly a 10 on the river to win here. We're definitely not getting a good price to do that, and I throw our hand in.
Hi. I got so lucky.
Yeah?
I didn't manage to catch it on video, but he flips over King 10, meaning we had him dominated and way behind as all the money went in, but he managed to catch his gut shot draw on the turn. Not really much we can do here other than throw our hand away when behind. 20 minutes later, we've got 10-9 suited in the hijack. It folds to us, and I make it 30. The small blind and big blind both call, and the three of us take a flop. And it's a pretty good one as it comes down 8-9 jack with two clubs, giving us second pair and a straight draw. Both our opponents check, and I c-bet for 70. The small blind calls, and the big blind folds. The turn brings the queen of clubs, so we pick up the straight, though it also does bring in the front door flush. The small blind checks to us again, and I think we could definitely bet here for value, but I decide to check back to be a little trappy in hopes of getting a bet out of worse hands on the river, while also ensuring that we don't get check raised by better hands on the turn. The river brings the ace of hearts, and when our opponent checks a third time, I put out a pretty big bet hoping it looks more like a steal than a value bet. Unfortunately, he lays his hand down, so no extra value for us on this one. A few minutes later, we have our last interesting hand of the night. We've got 8-5 suited and diamonds on the button. The under the gun player raises to 30, and the player on the right calls. I decide to make a really loose call here in position, and the three of us take a flop. It comes down 8 high, so we flop top pair with some backdoor draws. The pre-flop raiser c-bets for 60, and the player between us gets out of the way. We're not going anywhere with top pair, so I make the call. The turn brings the ace of hearts. It's definitely a better hand for our opponent's range, though it does give us a gut shot. Our opponent checks to us though, so I check back and take the free card. And it's a pretty good card as we see the 8 of spades giving us trips. Our opponent checks again, and I think we can make another big polarizing bet here, hoping for a call. I make it $200. We get a pretty quick call, and I show our opponent the bad news. Our hand is good, and we take down one last pot for the night. Well, that was a bit of a wild ride, to put it mildly. At our peak, we were up about 1.7K, doing really well and just running hot as well. But obviously had that big hand where I just totally donked off. Huge mistake, probably the biggest poker mistake, if not one of the top two that I've ever made, I would say. Just that guy was so aggressive that I thought he could be doing that with a lot of draws and holding paint that we're still ahead of, and decided that I'm gonna go ahead and hold my ground, stand my ground. I think the problem is that A, it's just a huge risk, and B, we just don't have any fold equity given the size of our stack that we're pushing with relative to the amount that he raised for. So not really the best play on my end, but managed to work our way back, thankfully. So going from that plus 1.7K stack we had, we went down to minus 1K. That 10-5 flopped two pair hand. Pretty unfortunate. I know it's a hand I shouldn't be playing, but I was kind of like, all right, I've got a maniacal image. If I hit a big flop, I think that I could get some action. We hit a big flop, but it turned out we had the second best. But anyway, so that got us into the negative 1K hole. Eventually worked our way around, got a lot of actions since people thought we were a Maniac, which we kind of were at that point, but everybody was paying us off, so worked our way back up to 1.2K at our peak after that, gave a little bit back at the end, and then ultimately won a little over 900. So very roller coaster session in the end throughout, and then ended up with a win in the end, which I'm thankful for given the circumstances. Happy with the monetary result. Not happy with a few of my plays for sure, but happy with some of the other ones that did, that I did have good reads on, and I think played pretty well given the state of my image. So I think more happy than unhappy, with the exception of that huge punt with the ace-3 hand. So anyway, thanks for watching. Gonna try to play some more 510 again tomorrow while I'm in town. Hopefully, I try not to make the same mistake twice, so no more punting from me. Hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Take care.